Malaria is a vector-borne disease transmitted by this mosquito, the mosquito from the genus Anopheles. Now keep in mind that it is not the mosquito that causes malaria, but the microorganism inside the infected female Anopheles mosquito, which is a unicellular protozoa from the genus Plasmodium. We're talking about malaria today because of our STPM2 syllabus for Chapter 13, Infectious Diseases, Subtopic 13.5, Malaria, Section B, where we need to know how to explain the transmission of malaria. So come, join me in BioWorld. Now, if you had caught my earlier video on dengue, you would have come to know that there are two types of dengue infections. The primary infection, which we normally can recover from, and the secondary infection, which is quite lethal because it develops into dengue shock syndrome or dengue hemorrhagic fever. Well, it turns out malaria also has a concept of primary and secondary, but it is not in relation to infection. Instead, it has a primary host and a secondary host. Let's find out what that means. Firstly, the story starts with a malaria patient. Malaria patients will have blood that contains Plasmodium gametocytes. As usual, when the mosquitoes come to bite, the Anopheles mosquitoes bite at night between dusk and dawn. So as you understand, when mosquitoes bite, they suck in the blood, and along with the blood go in the Plasmodium gametocytes. Now, when these gametocytes sit in the stomach of the Anopheles mosquito, reproduction happens. Since reproduction happens in the mosquito is considered the secondary host. Now, what happens in the mosquito's stomach is that these gametocytes, there will be a male and a female, they will carry out sexual reproduction to form a zygote. This zygote is called an ookinet. It is diploid. But this ookinet then will undergo meiosis to produce haploid cells once again. These haploid cells are called sporozoites, and they are considered immature parasites. So a reminder, in the secondary host, sexual reproduction occurs, but because it is followed by a meiosis, therefore the final product are haploid sporozoites. Now let's find out what happens next. Once the Anopheles mosquito has the sporozoites, they are considered infected. So now, when they come and bite an uninfected person, the haploid sporozoites will travel into the blood of that person. These haploid sporozoites then will travel to the liver, where asexual reproduction occurs. The sporozoites will divide by mitosis to form a bunch of cells called schizons. Once the population of schizons is maximum, it will cause a rupture of the liver cells to release what we call as the mature parasites. These mature parasites are called merozoites. The merozoites then travel to the red blood cell. So note now that the human is the primary host since asexual reproduction occurs to form the mature parasites. Now, what do the mature parasites do in the red blood cell? Let's find out. In the red blood cell, the haploid merozoites will continue to do asexual reproduction by mitosis to increase the number of merozoites, forming a clump of cells called the schizons, And just as what happened in the liver, the schizoids will cause a rupture of the red blood cells to release more haploid merozoites. So these merozoites then will travel on to infect other red blood cells. Now, when these haploid merozoites leave the red blood cell, they also form waste material called hemozoin. This hemozoin stimulates the white blood cells of the infected person to produce cytokines. And these cytokines, as we learned in dengue earlier, will cause us to form fever. So here is where you can see the fever pattern, which is very clear symptom of a malaria infection. As long as the merozoites do not rupture the red blood cells, there will be no fever in the patient. But the moment the red blood cells rupture, the fever will develop. Now, the difference between the asexual reproduction in the liver compared to the asexual reproduction in the red blood cell is that in the liver, as mentioned earlier, the asexual reproduction happens from a sporozoid forming a merozoite. That means from an immature parasite forming a mature parasite. Whereas in the case of the red blood cell, the asexual reproduction is where the merozoites multiply to form more merozoites. Let us continue further to understand that it is not only the asexual reproduction that happens in the red blood cell. There is another very important event that happens in the red blood cell. These haploid merozoites can also differentiate. They differentiate into gametocytes. So these male and female gametocytes will rupture the red blood cell and move into the patient's bloodstream. So now, when a mosquito comes and bites that individual, the gametocytes re-enter the stomach of the mosquito and the cycle repeats. So this is how transmission of malaria occurs. Let's now summarize what we have learned about malaria infections. Firstly, we understand that for malaria to occur, you need the human as the primary host and the mosquito as the secondary host. It all starts with the gametocytes in the infected human blood that is transported into the mosquito when the mosquito bites the infected patient. Then the gametocytes carry out sexual reproduction to form diploid ookinets. And these ookinets will carry out meiosis to form haploid sporozoites, which are immature parasites. Then, when this infected mosquito bites a healthy person, the sporozoid enters the blood of that healthy person and travels to the liver. In the liver, the sporozoid carries out asexual reproduction to form haploid merozoites, which are mature parasites. These mature parasites then travel into the red blood cell and continue to do asexual reproduction to increase the population of merozoites, which continue to infect more red blood cells, causing more hemozoin to form and incidence of fever to occur. At the same time, the merozoites can also differentiate to form gametocytes so that the cycle repeats. And that is the whole story of malaria infection. After learning about the transmission of both malaria and dengue by the Anopheles and Aedes mosquitoes, you may think that we have no chance against them. However, in my next video, I will explain how we can prevent from getting these infections. Until then, bye-bye.